I want to talk to you about Antiscia and Contra Antiscia special tips for the Astro-Tourist. And I am Samuel F. Reynolds, and you can contact me at unlockastrology.com. So, moving ahead, I want to cite this particular Latin phrase that, and then you see the translation below. You might have heard it differently, where it says, all roads lead to Rome. And it says here, mille viae ducunt hominis per secula Romam, which means 1,000 roads lead men forever to Rome, Alain de Lille. And what that means and why that's relevant here is that I'm going to show you, at least that's my aspiration, to show you the ways that you can see connections between planets and points in ways that are not common. So here's some travel advisory, some things to contemplate before we start our waist deep, maybe even chest deep journey into Antiscia and Contra Antiscia. So I have a passion for Antiscia and Contra Antiscia. I have them printed out with every chart that I use in every consultation, and I look at them to see those particular connections. And once you know about them and see how they work, which is going to be my aspiration during this presentation, you can't unsee them. You're going to be paying attention to them, I think, quite consistently, especially as you get them more in your head. So I hope that this becomes an unlocking of a new dimension of connection between planets and points in a chart for you, no matter what kind of chart you look at. So as Orana mentioned, I actually I live in Newark now, New Jersey, but for many years I lived in a stone's throw away from here, New York City. And one of the things that's fascinating about the city is that we have our subways, we have our buses, we have obviously the cabs and Ubers and things like that. But what really was one particular point of distinction between someone who was a tourist and someone who was a resident in New York was their familiarity with the buses. So let me talk to you about that. And here's like the description that you're looking at. You have the bus actual schedules, and well, not scheduled, the subway setup in New York City, which is not necessarily as elaborate as many other cities that I've seen around the world, but a little more complicated is getting around with the buses. Now, why? Why care? Well, one of the problems in New York City is that if you're on, let's say, the east side, as I'm pointing with my cursor, if you can see it, I don't know if my cursor is visible, but I'm looking at the east side, which is on the right side of your screen. And if you're going from the east side of the city, it's actually kind of difficult to get to the west side of Manhattan. And by the way, New Yorkers call Manhattan the city, even though it includes a total of 5 boroughs. What helps in getting between parts of the city are the buses if you don't take an actual cab, because it's, like I said, the subways don't necessarily easily connect. So one way to think about the Ptolemaic aspects, which is what I'm listing here: conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition. You might think of those as the subway or the metro, for more Europeans among us that call it that particular thing. So those aspects, we're usually trained as astrologers to look at them very clearly, and we might even look at the lesser known harmonics, quintiles, septiles, semi-squares, and the like. But none of those really kind of touch the same sensibility as we have, or texture as we have with the comparable analogy of the bus. So what if I told you there are ways you can experience the planetary connections between points and planets beyond the symmetry of houses or aspects? That would be like the way locals can get around a city that tourists often don't know. That we can return to a vision, and this is what's central, of the sun's light as a way to understand this shadowy, perhaps even secret way of seeing the symmetry between planets. So if I could show you that, and here it is. Because symmetry is really at the heart of most of how we talk about and have the design of astrology. As above, so below, as within, so without, as the cosmos, so the soul. So that's when I like to introduce to you the concept and idea of Antiscia and Contra Antiscia. So what does that relate to? First, I believe in showing visuals. And before I start to explain, do not worry, I will explain and give you a definition of Antiscia. But sometimes seeing things becomes a way of understanding before we get into the explanation of things. So what you might see is that we have all the cardinal points, or what we might say in terms of cardinal signs, from Cancer, Capricorn, Libra, Aries. And what, in terms of looking at the solstices, what I'm saying is that there's a connection between Capricorn and Sag, and then going to the next sign, either end, Aquarius, Scorpio, Pisces, Libra, Aries, Virgo, Taurus, Leo, Gemini, and Cancer. So there's a parallel construction between each and all of these points in terms of their relationship, starting from Capricorn and Sag, or if you're looking at it this way, Gemini and Cancer. So what does this mean? Signs are degrees of signs that are equally distant from both the summer and winter solstice. And so one of the terms and the labels given for Antiscia is that they're also called solstice points, or even solstitial points. As these mirror points, we will experience roughly the same amount of daylight or night when the sun travels through them during the year. So that's key, because when I said we're going back to basics, i.e. relating more so to the concept of the sun's light, what we're ultimately talking about is literally the idea of daylight between points, as I was illustrating here. Let me go back with the Antiscia points as seen here. Okay, now there's also something called Contra Antiscia. So Contra Antiscia we might call equinoctial points, and they are more along the axis of the equinoxes rather than the solstices. Essentially, they're the same thing, in terms of connections, but we're starting from the equinoxes. So we see that Virgo connects to Libra, Leo to Scorpio. Again, this is Contra Antiscia. Pisces, Cancer to Sagittarius, Gemini to Capricorn, Taurus to Aquarius, Aries to Pisces. Now, how might we talk about this? Let me just kind of clarify also with Contra Antiscia. Again, that's more along the spring or vernal and autumnal equinoxes. Contra Antiscia is exactly opposite by degree and sign to the Antiscia. And again, just to refresh your memory, Antiscia here. And you might even see here that if Virgo is connected to Aries by Antiscia, then it only makes sense that also Pisces would be connected to Aries in that sense, because we're talking about their opposites. If the Antiscia of Venus is at 29 degrees Leo, then we can say that the actual Antiscia would be 1 degree Taurus. So we have Venus at 29 degrees Leo, and again, going back to our little graph here, then Leo, the Antiscia point, is going to be Taurus. So we have 1 degree of Taurus, which means then the opposite to 1 degree of Taurus is going to be 1 degree of Scorpio. And that means that 1 degree of Scorpio is then the Contra Antiscia of 29 degrees of Leo.